Welcome. I'm Sean Shanley with Verdiant,
I'm Andrew Grigsby with Veridiant.
and today we'll be covering battery energy storage in the Southeast. We would love your feedback on today's training so that we can improve for future audiences. We've provided an anonymous survey for you to fill out. If you're comfortable, there are also some questions on there to help us know what kind of folks we're reaching so we can understand who we're training and who we might be missing. This is an introductory course on the upcoming market transformations in residential batteries and should be used to help inform business owners and installers on basic background and to give you a sense of what you should ask for when you're making decisions. Our objective today is to provide you with an overview of the latest information and available resources. As professionals, you'll be selling, recommending, and hopefully installing battery systems for your clients. We want to make sure that you leave with useful facts about residential battery systems. Please remember this course is about energy storage using batteries. It's not about solar energy. At the end of the course, we hope that you'll be able to identify 3 technical components or characteristics of battery storage systems, 3 market considerations relevant to battery storage systems, 3 common myths and the pertinent facts, and 3 resources that professionals can obtain for helping to talk to users, businesses, and consumers. These resources come from a number of different places, including the U.S. Department of Energy. Our agenda today will be giving you a brief introduction to this project, going over the terminology and technology associated with battery storage systems, covering a few myths and the associated facts, providing market and incentive information, going over code and installation resources, and finally wrapping up with an activity. First, we'd like to introduce you to the Advanced Ready Workforce Project. We're here today thanks to funding from the U.S. Department of Energy, which is intended to increase the market penetration of 4 technologies: heat pump water heaters, air source heat pumps, electric vehicle charging systems, and residential battery systems. These technologies were chosen because they have some of the greatest potential for energy savings, cost savings, and market growth. We are required to include this statement. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the views of the U.S. Department of Energy or the United States government.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Now let's talk batteries, specifically the newer battery technologies being installed in homes and businesses as backup power systems and for other resilience and grid service functions. A battery to power your home is just a big rechargeable battery. Charge it, and it stores that electrical energy to discharge later and will power anything electrical. First, let's get really clear on some terms that will keep coming up: kilowatts and kilowatt hours. Kilowatts, which just means 1,000 watts, refers to the amount of instantaneous power that a battery or power plant or the wire in your wall can discharge at any given time. 1 watt isn't much power. It's just 1/746, to be precise, of 1 horsepower. So we often use larger denominations like kilowatts, 1,000 watts. A kilowatt hour is 1,000 watts used for an hour. That's energy or power used over time. Kilowatt hours are the units we all are charged for on residential electrical bills. And 1 kilowatt hour is what it takes to illuminate a 100-watt light bulb for 10 hours. A battery will have kW, kilowatt, and kWh, kilowatt hour, specs. The kilowatt figure indicates the maximum potential power output, or how big or power hungry of a device or devices that the battery can operate at one time. The kilowatt hour rating, kWh, then indicates for how long that device could operate when it's being run on that battery. It's the quantity of energy that could be released from the battery after being fully charged. Here's a way to understand this that may be very familiar to you. The average mobile phone battery stores 10 to 15 watt hours, circa 2023. Luckily, these devices are built to do things with tiny amounts of power. But as you surely know, how long your battery lasts depends on what you're asking the phone to do. If you're worried about running out of battery, you might limit the time spent doing things that use more power, like playing music out of the onboard speaker. And you might send texts instead of making calls. Or you might reduce the brightness of the screen, since a bright screen will drain the battery in a few hours. On the other hand, sitting in airplane mode, you can preserve some battery energy for several days. It's like the screen, speakers, and apps on the phone are all little power-hungry devices plugged into the phone's battery. They each deplete the battery's energy reserves when on. If your home has a battery and you experience frequent grid power outages, you might start thinking about all the electrical devices in your home like those apps and options on your phone. You might think about little changes you can make in order to preserve battery life. In some ways, a battery for a home functions much like a gas or diesel generator. When charged or fueled up, both will provide power on demand when grid power is unavailable. However, batteries do not generate power on their own, which, as the name suggests, is exactly what a generator does. This 10 kilowatt hour home battery on the left stores enough energy to power a typical American home for 2 to 10 hours, depending on what equipment is running. Generators make electricity when they're running. As long as they have fuel, they will run and can power devices, but they have to stay running to have power available. A 22 kilowatt propane generator will use about 2 gallons per hour running at half load, 3.6 gallons per hour at full load. Note that generators typically come in larger kW ratings, as consumers typically expect uninterrupted use of any or all electrical features of their home. Interestingly, 1 gallon of propane has the same BTU content as 37 kilowatt hours. That's over 4 times the stored energy of a typical residential battery. But a lot of that energy is wasted just to keep the device running so it's available whenever you want power. And that waste shows up in the form of exhaust and the heat produced by the generator. A battery only has a certain amount of kilowatt hours to discharge, but it discharges that energy only as needed. In other words, there are essentially no standby costs like you have with a generator that consumes fuel just to stay on. One final note, generators that are fueled by local methane gas pipes typically will operate constantly so long as the local gas lines are functioning.
Given the common association of batteries with solar arrays, solar installers have been among the first contractors to market and install the new lithium-ion home batteries. Much of the wiring work is complementary. The battery is plugged into the electric panel, just as the solar array is. But electrical and HVAC contractors are also getting into the game. Even generator installers are offering batteries now, and some of the legacy generator companies are offering their own branded solar and battery equipment now. You may notice that in some of our photos. But why is this all such a big deal now? What's changed? Until recently, home-scale batteries generally used a different technology, deep-cycle lead-acid batteries, like what powered older golf carts and RVs. Mostly these were used by off-grid solar homes to provide a little electricity through nights and cloudy days. You may know that standard motor vehicle batteries are lead-acid, but that's a shallow cycle battery, not designed to be discharged significantly, but rather to stay topped off. But that's not the technology that everyone is talking about these days. As folks know, the revolution in portable devices of the last 25 years has been fueled by lithium-ion battery technology. There are a variety of lithium-ion battery types. There's cobalt, magnesium, and phosphate, each with their own pros and cons. But for now, we'll be talking generally about lithium-ion types collectively. Lead-acid batteries are still widely available and are preferred for some applications, like an off-grid solar site with infrequent use and low power demands. But the vast majority of home battery installations as of 2023 are lithium-ion.
Here's a deeper dive into the differing specs between the two main residential battery options, with data circa 2023. The graphs show some of the main specs for what would be considered typical lead-acid or lithium-ion installations. That is, a moderate bank of lead-acid batteries or a single 10 kilowatt hour lithium-ion battery. Any given installation could have more or fewer batteries and thus would have different specs, but this would be typical for a lot of residential situations. Starting in the upper left and moving across, we see how the lithium-ion in green offers twice the capacity or amount of energy stored. It can produce a lot more power on an instantaneous basis, and the stored electricity can be used up more before it has to be recharged. Then on the bottom row, a battery's efficiency refers to the percentage of the energy it stores that can be put to use later. The difference from 100% is energy that is leaked or lost as heat. In other words, to get 9.5 kilowatt hours of energy out of a 95% efficient lithium-ion battery, you'd have to charge it with 10 kilowatt hours. The lithium-ion battery is a little better here. It's also a little better on the warranty spec. Lastly, in the bottom right, you see the cost. For this example, the lithium-ion does cost 50% more on average when installed. So overall, lithium-ion definitely wins based on the performance specs, but it does come at a higher price. For the residential batteries being marketed these days, 10-year performance warranties are typical, but some manufacturers may specify a certain number of charge and discharge cycles as well. Like all electrical equipment, there is some performance degradation over time and with use. On average, home-sized lithium-ion batteries will experience about 3% reduced performance annually. But that also is affected by how much the battery is used. If you use the battery a lot, say 5,000 cycles in 1 year, then it probably won't last 10 years. And as you may have heard with respect to your phone, it's best to avoid charging it 100% or discharging to 100%. You'll get the longest life by cycling between 20% and 80% charge levels. That said, if the grid goes down, you'll probably want as much stored energy as possible in case the grid is down for a while. So I'd probably recommend using the battery for what you bought it for.
So how do you keep a residential battery charged? Generally, these will be hardwired to your home's electric panel. After that, it's just a question of where the power to your panel is coming from. In most cases, it'll come from the grid, so from your local electric utility. If the building has a solar array sending power to the panel, the battery will draw on that generation as available. If nothing else is available, you could even recharge from another battery, like the big lithium-ion battery in an electric vehicle, if you're ready with the required wiring. Compare this to those portable power banks folks buy to juice up their cell phones when a wall plug isn't available. And finally, a portable or hardwired generator can be used to recharge a battery as well. This is sort of a hybrid system that some folks are using. If you have the right design and equipment, you could use a battery as the standard energy source from the home to ride through brief outages, and then use your generator for a short period to fully charge the battery. This design avoids the standby losses of having a powerful generator idling most of the time, and, so long as you have fuel for the generator, ensures continuous power for the home over long periods of time. The generator acts like that cell phone power bank, except that it's gas powered, and your 1 gallon of gas will fully recharge your home battery 30 times. When installing residential batteries, many folks include a complementary device called a load management device or system. These devices enable residents to program which circuits to prioritize when the home is running on battery power. They're also used to extend the duration of battery power available by shutting off less important devices, rooms, etc. And they can ensure that critical equipment like medical devices, security systems, or IT are powered as long as possible. Load management devices generally come with web interfaces and apps, and some include monitoring of all of the circuits in the home. That's great for tracking and managing energy use overall, for locating equipment malfunctions, and for generally understanding what the home's biggest energy users are and when they use power. Of course, manufacturers are always innovating. Now some electric panel manufacturers are integrating those load management devices directly into the panel. There are new options and tools every day. Some products may go by the wayside, but some may be the norm in a few years.
Okay, so that's an overview of the technology, and I hope it's answered some of your basic questions. But what we know is that there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace relative to residential batteries. So we're going to take on some of those myths directly over the next few slides. A lot of folks really associate batteries with rooftop solar. Is it true that only solar homes will benefit from battery technology?
Nope, that's not true. It used to be that it was true many decades ago. They often went in hand, because so many of the first buildings that were equipped with solar panels were off-grid, and so they needed that battery capability to help them still have power during the night or cloudy days. But battery energy storage can provide value in a wide variety of situations, whether solar is involved or not. First, any home that experiences occasional power outages is going to be more functional and convenient if there's energy stored on site in order to power electrical devices, regardless of what the grid is doing. Secondly, beyond convenience during grid outages, a battery can maintain vital services like refrigeration for food and medicine, or uninterrupted power for critical medical equipment or IT infrastructure. And then finally, depending on the plans that might be available from local utilities, battery owners may be able to sell stored energy back to the utility during periods of particularly high demand. Utilities have huge financial incentives to avoid brownouts and blackouts, so they see those home batteries as essentially a grid asset that they can utilize to minimize the chance of a brownout or blackout. So there's really no inherent connection between batteries and solar. As discussed at the beginning, batteries are best thought of as a potential alternative to a gas generator.
Okay, so solar and battery don't necessarily go hand in hand, but I still feel like, we don't see many batteries out there. The technology feels kind of exotic when we're talking about homes. Is it ready for prime time?
It is ready. You should know that most of the batteries that are whole home batteries are essentially just larger versions of the ones that we see in smartphones, tablets, or laptops. As of 2025, the technology is really pretty mature, and it continues to evolve and improve. As mentioned earlier, there are a variety of lithium-ion subtypes and completely different battery chemistries that are under development.
I mean, what does it cost? How much is it going to cost me to get a battery that'll run my whole home?
These products definitely aren't cheap. As of January 2025, you'll likely pay between $9,000 and $12,000 for a typical home battery of about 10 kilowatt hours. And that's including the savings from the 30% federal tax credit. But too expensive for one person might be completely reasonable to another person. It all depends on how important the functionality is to the buyer of it, and what options the buyer might have for monetizing the grid services of the battery. At any rate, as you can see in the graph, prices for batteries have been on a steady decline as global production has increased. There was a slight increase in costs in 2022 as so many supply chains were disrupted by Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Long term, it's reasonable to expect that prices are going to continue a modest decrease.
If I do have a battery, can I still be connected to the grid?
Yep, absolutely. There's a lot of confusion about solar and batteries, and it's sort of a shame because both technologies are actually relatively simple. A home-based solar array is a power plant that feeds directly into the electric panel. If that panel is grid-tied, as most are, there's likely a bidirectional meter that allows the excess electricity production from the panels to flow back out onto the grid. And the meter basically runs backwards when that happens. The battery, a whole home battery, also connects to the electric panel. It's charged by electricity flowing through that panel from any source, so that can be the grid or those PV panels, and it can also send power back to the panel, which then, as we discussed earlier, can make it available to the whole home, send it to specific circuits in the home, or even send it back out onto the grid. It's really no more complicated than that. If the home happens to be in an area without net metering, there wouldn't be a bidirectional meter. In that case, power from either the solar array or the battery could only ever be used or stored in the home behind the meter, as it's called.
Let's talk a little more about the market for residential batteries, including how it fits into larger trends, and we also want to cover the federal tax credit. Here's a quick graph just to show trends in battery technology growth. It's a huge global market that is growing rapidly year after year and is projected to keep expanding. The batteries we install in our homes have many applications, from portable devices to vehicles, even to huge power systems that go on the grid. And there are many, many markets where there's high demand for these. So there's every expectation that this market will continue to grow over the coming years. You may have heard that there's a tax credit for residential battery installations. That's true. It's called the 25D Residential Clean Energy Credit. It provides 30% back. That's it. No gimmicks, no mystery. It's a simple 2-page, 30% credit on your taxes. And thanks to the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, non-tax-paying entities like schools, hospitals, houses of worship can now receive a cash payment equal to the tax credit. So even more buildings will be looking into this option. As of this recording, federal law has these policies in place until the year 2032. We've mentioned a few times how there can be opportunities for battery owners to earn income from their electrical utility. Here's how that works. For an electrical utility, not every kilowatt or kilowatt hour costs the same to generate and deliver. On hot summer afternoons, when most every air conditioner is running, grid operators are firing every generator possible, even ones that are more costly to operate. On the other hand, there are times like late at night or when outside temperatures are mild, when hardly any electrical equipment may be running in a building. But the utility still has to have power available at any second, so they keep their cheapest generation running on standby, resulting in wasted fuel. It's the same scenario we described for home generators. Given this, utilities may be willing to sell that late night power at a lower rate and then pay more than their standard residential rate for extra power delivered to them on hot afternoons. So, where regulations allow, a battery owner may be able to buy cheap and sell high as a player in the electricity market. This market arbitrage, as it's called, has become a multi-billion-dollar industry globally in just a few years, and a residential battery offers the same opportunity. This grid arbitrage is also sometimes called load shifting, and it's enabled by time of use rates. And it's all part of the evolving smarter grid that is a two-way grid rather than the one-way system of years ago. A residential battery can be a power resource for the utility, what is sometimes called a grid asset. It benefits everyone to make use of all grid assets. It reduces costs for the utility and for consumers while cutting total emissions from electrical generation.
Batteries are in the news a lot these days, and a lot of folks are concerned about the environmental impact of making these devices. Others are asking if the economic case for batteries is really as good as promoters suggest. It certainly makes sense to approach any new technology critically and give a good faith effort to assess all economic and environmental costs and benefits. Batteries in buildings are extremely beneficial for overall electrical system management, from the home to the grid. Because they can either absorb excess generation or power equipment at any time, some call batteries the Swiss Army knife of the power grid. In places or times where there is excess wind and solar power feeding into the grid, batteries can store that clean energy for later use. Their stored energy avoids the need to have generators running on standby even when there's no demand. That can save a lot of money in fuel while significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But batteries certainly aren't benign. Like most consumer and industrial electronics, they tend to be constructed using rare earth metals in a chemically intense, power-hungry process. And like any electrical device or combustion engine, lithium-ion battery systems can fault and catch fire. They must be installed and operated safely. Overall, most experts agree that the benefits outweigh the costs. But that's not a reason to stop innovating. Researchers around the world are working to create energy storage options that use cheaper, more benign raw materials like salt water or iron. As of today, flow and sodium nickel chloride batteries are two of the more promising alternatives to lead acid and lithium ion. One more slide on how batteries fit into our broader energy transition and the growing trends that are driving increased deployment of battery energy storage in all sorts of buildings and by utilities. We're seeing increasing public interest in backup power, smart homes, all-electric homes, and energy independence. Equipment costs are declining. Batteries and grid communication are being integrated into more devices and buildings, and there's a lot of interest in batteries from grid managers, both local utilities and federal regulators. So more and more utilities are increasing their offerings of time of use rates and other means of rewarding battery owners for discharging the batteries at certain times. All of these factors driving battery deployment are turning buildings into real players on the electric grid. That's what these graphics illustrate. These smarter buildings help manage the balance of power on the grid by modulating the amount of power that they take from it, or if they have batteries on site, provide to the grid. Batteries are special in that they're the only device that can do both. As the grid gets smarter, this feature of batteries will become ever more valuable to everyone. Many folks are starting to refer to these energy technology and market trends with one term, electrification. A lot of it is simply driven by the market. Fossil fuel prices have always been volatile. The methane gas price spikes of 2022 weren't unusual in that sense, but now more buildings are going all electric because they can. They can eliminate gas pipes and monthly fees, venting challenges, and potential health and safety issues. Remaining customers on the gas grid have to pay more than just to maintain the infrastructure. Meanwhile, wind and solar generation is being installed in more and more locations, and the electricity they generate won't ever increase in price because of fuel costs. The sun and wind are free, so those prices stay stable. Building owners like that, utilities like that. And with programmable thermostats, smart water heaters, batteries, and more, we see the electrical devices in buildings heating, cooling, and even making money by providing grid services. Consumers like the functionality that batteries offer. That's clear. And batteries can easily be included in a new home or added to an existing one. As you become more familiar with the technology, you should be able to help your customers make smart decisions about when the cost makes it worthwhile for them, and it makes you more valuable and stand out from your competition. Let's talk a bit about the code requirements and best practices for residential battery installations. Residential batteries first gained mention in the Model Building Codes with the 2018 edition. That language is pretty brief. The 2024 International Residential Code has a lot more detail covering ventilation requirements, requirements for when a battery may be installed in living space, protection from impact, etc. Exact code language for the states is available at the codes.iccsafe.org website. To summarize these codes, follow all electrical and other codes, and have the installation work permitted and inspected. There are also best practices that will improve safety, reduce installation costs, and maintain best performance. You'll want it to design to minimize expensive resource use, install in a safe, protected area, protect from water and big moving things like cars, provide ventilation as needed depending on the exact battery type, also provide heat and/or smoke detection devices, and ensure other fire safety measures such as drywall covering walls is present. Just to highlight this, lithium-ion batteries, especially lithium cobalt, can catch fire. The basic point is that today's residential batteries are chemically and electrically intense, like so many things. Like the smartphone you may have in your pocket right now. As always, use precaution with all power sources, electricity, gas lines, and combustion appliances. And as with any expensive piece of equipment, you'll want to protect it from flooding risk. Install batteries well above base flood elevation. Now we're going to do a quick exercise to help us appreciate exactly what a typical lithium-ion residential battery will do. So let's think through a typical 10 kilowatt hour residential battery and what services it can actually provide in the home. To do this, we're going to need to take a look at all of the electrical appliances in a home. This is going to be a pretty simplified example. So first, we've got a 1200 watt microwave. That's a big power draw, but we also don't use it too many hours of the day. CPAP's pretty important, but it's got very modest energy usage. The fridge uses 700 watts when it's running. That certainly adds up. It's good to know that you can get much better refrigerators that use a lot less energy, because that 700 watt one uses about 84% of the battery's capacity, so it's very substantial.
All right, and so as I follow along in this table, what I'm seeing is those devices are coming up. I'm seeing how much wattage they draw instantaneously and then how many hours they run per day. So it shows up in kilowatt hours per day. And then given that, how many run days on a 10 kilowatt battery.
Exactly.
So like that refrigerator, it's showing it'll only run for a little over 1 day on that whole battery?
Yep, and that's if you're only running that refrigerator.
Okay, this is getting interesting.
So then we've got the big screen television. That's also got a pretty noticeable draw when it's on, so you definitely want to either turn it off during the power outage when you're relying on your battery, or make sure it's off when it's not being watched. And older models do have a pretty high draw when they're off, when they're in standby mode, so it's a good excuse to replace to a newer model. The router uses very little energy. A few LEDs are also a pretty modest energy draw, but make sure those lights are LEDs.
Okay.
If they're incandescent, they use almost 10 times that much energy.
10 times.
Yep. And they also put off a lot of heat in the summertime, which is going to increase your cooling needs. Lastly, we've got the big one. This is an older air conditioner, and it will by itself use essentially the whole battery in about 4 hours. So that's a big challenge to overcome.
Okay, so looking at this table, we've got all those devices, again, a simplified home because there might be other things running in the home. And it sounds like this, we're talking about summertime, so maybe some summertime storm and the power goes out, or the tree came down my backyard and took out power to my house. So I might be out of power for a while. But what I'm seeing on the bottom row is that battery, when this is a standard, like when I say I'm going to go buy a residential battery, this is one of them. One of those, it's pretty big, but it's one of them. It's only going to run all that stuff under normal use for about a third of a day.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, that's not quite what I expected from all this.
Right. And so that's when you want to start to evaluate, do I want to modify my energy usage to help the battery last longer, or do I want to spend money on additional battery capacity?
Okay.
So one of the things that you could look at, we've already talked about the refrigerator, so that's a potential area where you could pretty significantly reduce your energy usage. You'll see that we've added a ceiling fan.
Okay.
And we've also changed the air conditioner.
Right, it was a 3-ton that used over 2,000 watts.
Yep. So if we were able to, let's say, reduce the drafts in the home, increase insulation, seal ductwork, those sorts of measures, you may get the house down to only needing a 2-ton heat pump, which would give you the opportunity to get a high efficiency one, which will overall reduce your energy usage. Adding a ceiling fan, when ceiling fans run, people are more comfortable. So you could potentially increase the temperature that you have your house set to and run the ceiling fans, which, as you can see, use a lot less energy.
So more efficient AC because I made the home better, and I'm even changing the thermostat because I'm running a ceiling fan.
Exactly.
But I also made an investment in improving the home and buying a new AC and bought the battery. So we've spent some money so far.
We have, and there is that 30% tax credit for residential battery installations. There's also tax credits of up to $2,000 for installing those high efficiency heat pumps, and up to $1,200 for installation improvements. So there are tax credits available to help offset those. Additionally, the Homes and HERO programs of the IRA are going to offer extensive rebates on HVAC equipment, water heaters, insulation, doors, windows, even electric panel work and some wiring upgrades. And those are getting rolled out state by state. So those are pretty generous.
Okay. Well, but we did all this and I'm still only at 0.37 days. I was at 0.3.
Yep.
So made a big change, but I'm having a hard time running all of this, and it may take a while before they get that tree off my power line.
Yes, so it may be that you have to make the choice to not run the central AC. That was a very significant user of energy, and you are a little bit uncomfortable for a bit and rely on the ceiling fan. That uses a lot less energy, and now we're up to about 0.8 of the day.
Okay, but my refrigerator's still running.
Yep.
And the CPAP and the microwave and the TV. So we're still running a lot of stuff, just not the air conditioner.
Exactly.
What I'm hearing here is that if I'm a contractor selling this equipment, or if I'm a consumer looking at buying one of these, I really need to be conscious of exactly what it'll do in the home, and not get my hopes up that these one single battery is going to run everything in my home for several days.
Exactly. You can start off with that wish list, find out pricing to have enough battery capacity to cover that, and then sort of balance that out to a good price point on battery capacity versus what you're willing to sacrifice during those times of power outages.
Okay, that's helpful. And it'll depend if it's wintertime and the grid's out.
Exactly.
Depend on, are you heating with a fossil fuel versus heating with electric?
Exactly.
But you did say I can buy a new TV.
I did.
Okay. So ultimately, discussions about residential batteries become great opportunities to talk about energy use more broadly and to strategize about the smartest way to meet residents' goals for continuous power, for comfort, for energy savings, and more. A home really is a system of equipment, people, and even the weather and other things that affect the building. A residential battery is a tool that can do certain things, and it's a great tool for certain jobs. And a great contractor will help their client focus on exactly what jobs must, should, or can be accomplished to take into account the whole system's strengths and weaknesses and offer comprehensive solutions to meet their client's goals. As we noted when we started this slideshow, we'd love your feedback on the information in the presentation. This QR code will take you to an anonymous survey where you can provide that valuable feedback. That's our slideshow on residential batteries. We hope you found it informative. I'm Andrew Grigsby with Viridient.
And I'm Sean Shanley.
And thanks very much for your attention today.